Welcome to the deep dive. Wow, you really went all out this time sending us this mountain of stuff on organizational behavior management. I mean, we've got classic textbooks and the latest research on acceptance and commitment therapy, even some pieces from publishing indexes. Is like you want to understand not just OBM, but how it's changing with all the new stuff from behavioral science.
It is a lot to dig through, but I can already tell there are some real treasures in here. We can definitely get a solid grasp of OBM and then see how ACT is adding a whole new layer.
Okay, I like that. Before we get to the revolution, though, let's paint the before picture. A lot of these older sources are all about traditional OBM with that big focus on goals and rewards. It's that classic image of the carrot on a stick, right?
Right. It is a good image, though. Traditional OBM often looked at behavior as mostly driven by those external things, the rewards and punishments, like performance metric or bonuses, stuff like that. Those methods definitely have a good track record when it comes to productivity, but maybe they aren't so good at capturing all the complexities of how people act.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. All this stuff you sent on ACT seems to flip that old model around. Instead of just focusing on external motivators, it's all about understanding how our own minds can either help or hurt us at work.
It really is a fascinating change in perspective. ACT introduces this idea of psychological flexibility, which is basically the ability to adapt to changing demands, control your impulses, and stay on target with your goals even when things get tough. It suggests that we can train our minds to become more resilient and resourceful when we face stress.
Okay, so in theory, that sounds great. But how does this psychological flexibility actually work in a real job setting? Do you have any real-world example from the research that shows this in action?
Absolutely. One of your sources talked about a study with employees who were learning how to use new software. The people who had higher levels of psychological flexibility learned and adapted to the software better, and it didn't even matter how much control they felt they had over their work. It's like their inner resilience helped them get past any external roadblocks.
That's really interesting. So even if you feel stuck in a limiting situation, your mindset can completely change how you perform and adapt. It's like having a secret mental weapon. But hold on a sec. How do we actually develop this psychological flexibility? Is it something we're born with, or is it something we can build?
That's a great question. And the good news is psychological flexibility is something we can actually cultivate through practice. ACT gives us a framework with 6 core processes that work together to build that inner strength.
6 processes. Okay, I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed. But I know you can break this down for me. So tell me, what are these magical 6 processes and how do they actually work?
Let's start with 2 processes that help us change how we relate to those difficult internal experiences: acceptance and diffusion. Think of acceptance as allowing thoughts and feelings to just be there without judging them or fighting them. It's not about liking them, it's just about making room for them. Diffusion, on the other hand, is about recognizing those thoughts as just thoughts, not facts.
So instead of getting caught up in the stories our mind is making up, we can just observe those thoughts without letting them control what we do.
Exactly. It's like watching clouds float by. We see them, but we don't feel like we have to grab them or push them away.
Okay, I like that visual. So we've got acceptance and diffusion. What are the next 2 processes in this flexibility framework?
The next 2, self as context and being present, are all about shifting our attention. Self as context encourages us to see ourselves as something bigger and unchanging that includes all those fleeting thoughts and emotions. It's like remembering that the sky is still huge and blue, even when there are storm clouds passing through. Being present is about being mindful, really engaging with the current moment both inside and outside of ourselves.
So it's not about pretending those thoughts and feelings aren't there. It's more about recognizing them as temporary things happening within a bigger, more stable you.
You got it. And last but not least, we have values and committed action. Values are like your guiding compass. They point you toward the kind of person you want to be and the life you want to live.
And committed action is about taking steps in that direction consistently, even when it's tough or uncomfortable.
That's the heart of it. We accept and diffuse our thoughts, ground ourselves in a larger sense of self, and then take actions that line up with our values. That's how we make real, lasting changes.
This all sounds really empowering, but I have to ask, what's the science behind all of this? Is there any solid research to back up these ACT principles, or is it more like a self-help philosophy?
It's definitely grounded in real science. The foundation for ACT comes from something called Relational Frame Theory, or RFT. It's a model of how human language and cognition work.
RFT? Okay, you've got me hooked. Tell me more. What's so special about this theory?
What's really cool about RFT is that it sees language as more than just a tool for communication. It sees language as a force that shapes how we perceive things, our emotions, and even our behavior.
So you're saying the words we use, the stories we tell ourselves, all of that has a real impact on how we experience the world and how we act in it. Like we're constantly creating our own realities through language.
Exactly. One of your sources used the saying, blondes have more fun as an example. There's no real logical connection between hair color and having fun, right? But because of language, we've made this link that can actually affect how we see and treat people.
That is such a great example of how powerful language can be in shaking our understanding of the world. And sometimes it seems like that power can be used for good, but other times it can lead us down some pretty confusing paths.
That's true. And that's what ACT comes in. It offers tools and techniques that help us become aware of those mental traps and become more flexible in how we relate to our thoughts and feelings.
And it's about learning to use the power of language to our advantage instead of letting it run wild and cause unnecessary suffering.
Exactly. And that's what makes ACT such a powerful addition to those traditional OBM methods. It acknowledges the human side of the workplace by recognizing that behavior isn't just about external incentives, it's also about all the complex stuff going on in our minds.
That makes so much sense. We've gone from basic rewards and punishments to actually understanding how our own minds can help or hinder us at work. It feels like we've uncovered so much already, and I'm eager to explore more. But for now, I think we need to take a break and let all of this information sink in.
I agree. We've covered a lot, and there's still so much to discover.
Right, so we've got a good foundation for understanding both that traditional OBM and this newer ACT approach. But in all this material you sent, there's this whole section on a thing called deic relations within relational frame theory. Sounds a bit intimidating, to be honest. Can you help me unpack that a little?
Oh, it's not as complicated as it might sound at first. Deictic relations really just refer to the importance of perspective, that I hear now point of view. It basically means that words by themselves don't have some fixed meaning. It all depends on the context, who's saying them when and where they're saying it. That's what gives the words their meaning.
So like if my boss tells me this is important versus my coworker or my best friend saying the same thing. Those all mean totally different things, right? It's all about context.
Exactly. Understanding these deictic relations can be super valuable at work. It reminds us that communication isn't just about passing along information, it's also about understanding where the other person is coming from, building those connections, and navigating all the subtle social stuff that goes on.
It's like it adds this whole other level of awareness to how we're interpreting things and reacting to the people around us. And it's no wonder there's so much miscommunication. We're all walking around with these different internal maps of the world based on our own experiences.
Absolutely, and those different maps can definitely lead to misunderstandings and conflicts if we're not careful. That's where those ACT principles like diffusion and acceptance become so important. They give us the tools to step back from our immediate thoughts and feelings so we can consider other viewpoints without feeling attacked or getting defensive.
So instead of getting caught up in our own knee-jerk emotional reactions, we can just pause, take a breath, and try to engage with other perspectives in a more mindful and open way.
Exactly, and that ability to pause and observe instead of reacting on impulse, that's crucial for communicating effectively, working together, and especially for being a good leader.
That brings up a good point about leadership. We often think of strong leaders as those who set clear goals, offer good incentives, and make sure everyone is accountable. But is ACT suggesting a different way to think about leadership?
Well, those traditional elements are definitely still important, but ACT also encourages leaders to go beyond those external motivators and really tap into the values and passions that their team members already have.
So it's less about that command and control style and more about creating an environment where people feel empowered to do their best work and grow and develop.
That's the heart of it. It requires a deep understanding of human psychology. You have to acknowledge that people are driven by more than just tangible rewards or fear of punishment.
It's about connecting with those deeper human needs, like wanting to feel like your work has meaning, wanting to belong, and wanting to make a real contribution. It makes you wonder if those traditional OBM approaches might be missing out on a ton of untapped potential.
They very well could be. And those ACT principles like values clarification and committed action, those become essential for leaders who want to cultivate that sense of intrinsic motivation within their teams.
Because if you can help your team members connect their work to their own personal values, that's way more powerful and sustainable than any kind of external reward system you could come up with.
Exactly. It creates a sense of ownership and engagement that goes beyond just following orders or chasing after some reward.
So instead of just telling people what to do, effective leaders should inspire their team members to tap into their own internal drive and make sure their actions are aligned with what truly matters to them.
You got it. And that style of leadership not only makes people more productive, but it also creates a more positive and fulfilling environment for everyone.
Wow, it feels like we've come full circle. We started with the foundations of OBM, explored how complex human language and thought can be with RFT. And now we're seeing how all of that can completely change how we think about leadership and create better, more fulfilling work experiences. It's amazing how much ground we've covered.
It really is. It just goes to show how powerful it is to really dive into these subjects, consider different points of view, and connect the dots in a way that helps us understand ourselves and the world better.
And as always, we want to make this as practical and useful as possible for you, our listener. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about some specific tools and techniques that you can actually try out. We've already touched on mindfulness and values clarification, but are there any other ACT-inspired methods that could be helpful in a work setting?
Definitely. One really powerful tool is called diffusion exercises. These exercises are designed to create some distance between you and your thoughts and feelings so you're not so caught up in them.
Because let's be real, when we're completely fused with our thoughts, they can feel overwhelming and all-consuming. It makes it hard to think straight or make good decisions.
Exactly. Diffusion exercises help train your mind to see those thoughts as just thoughts. Those fleeting things that pop into our heads, not absolute truths or commands that we have to obey.
So can you give an example of a diffusion exercise, something our listener could try out right now?
Of course, one simple technique is called naming the story. Imagine you're stuck in a loop of negative self-talk. Like telling yourself, I'm incompetent or I'm going to mess this up. Instead of trying to fight those thoughts or push them down, just acknowledge them by saying to yourself something like, there's that incompetent story popping up again.
So you're basically labeling the thought pattern without getting lost in what it's actually saying. You're acknowledging it's there, but you're not letting it control you.
Exactly. And by doing that, you create a little bit of separation. It's like you realize that you are not your thoughts, you're the one observing them. It's a really powerful shift in perspective.
That's a great point. But I imagine it takes practice to get good at this. Those negative thoughts probably don't just disappear overnight, do they?
No, they definitely don't. It's like learning any new skill. It takes time and effort, but even just having a few brief moments of diffusion can make a big difference in how you perceive and manage those challenging thoughts and emotions.
And that's what's so empowering about ACT. It's not about magically getting rid of all negativity. It's about developing a more skillful and flexible relationship with your inner world.
Exactly, and that internal transformation then ripples outward. It affects how we interact with others, how we approach our work, and how we handle all the ups and downs that life throws at us.
This has been so fascinating. We've explored the theory behind ACT and RFT, look at practical tools like diffusion exercises, and even thought about how these principles can change how we lead and create better work environments. I feel like we've really dug deep on this topic today.
We definitely have. Out of all the things we've talked about, what has resonated most with you? What's sticking out as you think back on all this material?
To be honest, what really strikes me is how powerful our perspective is. How that internal map we have of the world, the one that's shaped by language and our experiences, can really influence our reality. And how learning to step back, observe those maps with more awareness, and make conscious choices about how we respond can make a huge difference in our well-being and how effective we are. It's like we each have the power to shape our own experiences.
That's a beautiful insight. It really captures the essence of ACT. It's the idea that while we can't always control what happens to us or the thoughts and feelings that come up, we can learn to respond to them in a way that aligns with our values and supports our well-being. And that's incredibly liberating.
It's like taking back our power, not by trying to force the world to be a certain way, but by learning to navigate it with wisdom and adaptability. We've been talking for a while now, and I'm getting the sense that we're getting close to wrapping up this book dive. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we start summarizing everything we've learned?
I think you've really captured it beautifully there. The core idea of this whole deep dive, it's about understanding that we actually have the power to shape our own experiences, even when things are tough. But you're right, we've explored a lot of ideas. Maybe it would be helpful to boil it all down to a few key takeaways, things that our listeners can really hold on to and use. What do you think?
I love that. It's like we're putting together a mental toolkit to help navigate all the complexities of work and life. Where should we start?
Well, first things first, it's crucial to remember that traditional OBM, while it's definitely effective in some situations, it doesn't always capture the whole picture of human behavior. It's kind of like trying to solve some complicated equation using only addition and subtraction.
Right, because as we've been discussing, humans aren't robots just reacting to external stimuli. We've got all these thoughts, feelings, values that really influence how we act.
Which leads us to our next point. ACT offers a much richer, more nuanced framework because it recognizes how much our internal world impacts our behavior and our experiences. It acknowledges that being human is complex.
And that's where those 6 core processes come in, right? Acceptance, diffusion, self as context being, present values, and committed action. They all contribute to building that psychological flexibility.
Now, underlying all of this is that fascinating world of relational frame theory, RFT, really highlights how powerful language is in shaping how we perceive things and our experiences. It reminds us that we can sometimes fall into mental traps that are created by our own language and thought patterns.
Like those examples we were talking about earlier, how a simple phrase like blondes have more fun can create these random associations that actually influence how we see and treat people. It reminds us to be careful about the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell others.
Absolutely. Another important takeaway is that developing psychological flexibility isn't just a nice bonus. It's essential if you want to thrive in today's work environments, which are constantly changing. It helps us learn new things, quickly adapt to all the changes, and perform at our best even when things are difficult.
And that bug about employees learning new software really showed how much of a difference psychological flexibility can make. The people who had it were able to adapt and learn no matter what limitations they faced externally.
Exactly. Now, what's really great about ACT is that its principles can be applied in practical, concrete ways to improve communication, reduce stress, and even encourage innovation within organizations.
We talked about diffusion exercises, mindfulness practices, and values clarification, all really useful tools for building a more flexible and resilient mindset. These aren't just theoretical concepts, they're actual strategies for growing both personally and professionally.
We also explored how ACT brings a new perspective to leadership, encouraging a shift from trying to control people from the outside to nurturing their internal motivation and helping them align their actions with their values.
It's less about barking orders and more about inspiring people. It's about creating environments where individuals can truly flourish, contribute their unique talents, and find real satisfaction in their work.
Right? And through this lens of deictic relations, we've discovered how important it is to be able to see things from different perspectives. We need to remember that we all have our own unique maps of the world, influenced by our individual experiences and interpretations.
And the more we can appreciate and understand those different perspectives, the richer and more meaningful our interactions become.
Absolutely. And as we navigate all those interactions, practicing diffusion and acceptance can help us create that space between ourselves and our thoughts and feelings. It allows us to respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting without thinking. It's about making conscious choices about how we respond.
It's like hitting that pause button, taking a breath, and remembering that we always have a choice in how we react to any situation. We're not just puppets controlled by our emotions or our thoughts.
Exactly. And maybe the most crucial takeaway of all is that even small, consistent steps towards integrating these ACT principles can lead to really big positive changes in our well-being, our relationships, and how effective we are at work.
It's not about expecting to change everything overnight. It's about embracing this ongoing journey of learning, growing, and becoming more skillful and navigating all the complexities of life.
So let's wrap it all up by quickly reviewing those 10 key takeaways we've covered today. Are you ready?
Absolutely hit me with them.
Dove già che se ne vecchio difficile guys and so on not school those thinking back is that label Jesus no I read it yeah working on just last get into like and the music gets that just takes away everything yeah really like love this chance and the amount of found again and I look at it and I can just feel like so what under I feel over the myself and it's yeah yeah, good saying. I where did you think that? Let's say stand as criminal. I don't have on a wing that doesn't be just this. So we went out pretty boy. Is this still not he used to be letting you go with the clock. All right, if I bring that oral, we can say, yeah, wine. Well, that's what is the real yeah. I leave juice cat off. That's lifestyle care within. I thought that the end got him created back. So, wait. What was it? The cow do that right? That's why I just thought that. Joining the Annie back and Renee was doing so man. I don't know that like listen to he how well I just had a mind that yeah I'm try but yeah what they just post that which you've already you read like a month where you like I Jenny high quality stuff this wing out it's not gonna happen I've got to wait I'm gonna have to like I fucking bloody or if I want raise it like what I want America yes you come with it eggs. This is a tower. Make rules. You don't have cuss. I play. I'm a blueful. Our guns are friends.
Wow, that's quite a list. We really have covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have, and I hope you're leaving this deep dive feeling not only more knowledgeable, but also empowered to use these insights in your own work and your own life, always remember you have the power within you to shape your experience.
I love that. That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive adventure. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning and growing.